Well, hello. This is my first installment. We made it to Alaska.
Right. And she's still licensed for operation, by the way. All three Discovery boats run as well as the day they were built. We could actually take Discovery 1 out today. It just might be a tight fit getting all of us on board there. But I would like to show you some pictures of the trip back in the early days also. Up on your screens you can see Captain Jim and Mary at the helm of the Discovery right after it was built. And what impresses me the most about this whole thing, folks, is that like any small family startup, they had to do this whole thing themselves. Captain Jim used to drive everybody in on a recycled school bus, then he'd run out back and change into his captain's uniform. Mary would provide commentary, much like I do now. After the two of them, they made coffee and donuts for all their guests. A tradition we keep going 73 years later. But as I mentioned, Fairbanks itself was founded off the back of a giant gold rush. And this building coming up here to our right gives me a good chance to talk about our gold mining history. This is the Chena River Pump House, and it used to contain these giant electric pumps that could suck 6,000 gallons of water a minute out of the Chena River and then send it up through a big pipeline over these hills to our right. And that style of mining died out a while ago, so the pump house had to convert. Now they're a nice restaurant and saloon. They don't pump a lot of water these days, just a bunch of beer after 5 p.m. But back when they were in active use for mining, all that water they would take out of the Chena River would eventually flow back into it, and it would do that via Cripple Creek, Alaska. This little cutaway in the bank over here to our right. And I know as we get closer, Cripple Creek is not exactly a scenic wonder. But this little stream is actually the richest gold-bearing river in the history of Alaska. I kid you not. 10 miles long, they pulled over $100 million of gold out of that. And that was the price of the day, too. Gold was 18 to 24 bucks an ounce back then. By today's prices, it's a haul of about $9.7 billion. And if you're curious what that whole mining operation looked like, I can show you that up on the screen as well. Because the pump house would take water up, send it through these big pipes, which got more and more narrow as they went. That increased the speed of the water until this guy at the end could shoot it out of these giant nozzles. He'd do the work of 15 to 20 people with picks and shovels alone. He could wash off that overburden, get at the gold-bearing dirt, and then this dredge would come up. These giant machines would just chew through the earth, pluck out the gold, and then everything else would kind of just spit right out the back. It left a big mess. And, we like how pretty our state is, so we don't mind that way anymore. But the old dredge operators used to be very proud of how efficient their machines were. They would actually joke that if a guy ever falls in the dredge, it's no problem. He'll come out the other side just fine, except his 4 gold teeth won't be there anymore. But as I said, it's kind of an older style of mining. That died out a while ago. And in that same vein, Discovery 3 is a bit of a vintage mode of transportation. Back in the early day, settlements were dependent on boats much like this. And then eventually, 100 years ago, 1923, we completed the Alaska Railroad. And that worked hand in hand with steamboats like this for quite a long time until eventually, about the mid-60s, when aviation really took a hold up here. And I know down south you've got big cities and big planes, but up here we've got some pretty small villages and, well, a lot of smaller planes in order to kind of keep pace with those. And a great example of one of those smaller aircraft is actually up here along the Chena River just up ahead of us. This bright yellow plane is a 1952 model Piper Super Cub. And these Super Cubs are kind of the quintessential small Alaskan aircraft, but this one's being piloted by a good friend of ours. He's actually going to be doing a takeoff over here along our right-hand side. It's kind of a good time for me to remind you that you don't have to stay super glued to those seats you're in. You're welcome to move around the boat, but do keep in mind if you're standing by a window or rail, you might block someone else's view, so please just try to keep each other honest on that. This one over here is kind of a perfect example of those lightweight, small Alaskan aircraft, which are renowned for their ability to take off and land in a very short distance. They'll only actually need about 40 miles per hour of airspeed over that wing. Makes for a nice, easy, gradual takeoff. He's equipped on floats because our state's a big place. You're not always going to find a runway. but you will find a lot of water because we have over 3 million lakes in Alaska. Yeah, 3 million. Minnesota, eat your heart out. He's a very good friend of ours. But all this is to illustrate that these little planes are not just a part of Alaska's past. They are very much part of our present. A little village like that one I taught in, the only way in or out 6 months out of the year is through a little plane like that. Maybe you go slightly bigger, a 6 or an 8-seater, but not much. Matter of fact, one of the pilots who used to live over here along the Cheetah River used to come out and tell us a story of him waking up one morning a few years back, getting a call from a young woman in a village nearby going into labor. She had to get flown into Fairbanks to give birth. So he said, all right, set down his morning coffee, hopped in his plane, flew 2 hours out to that village. 2 people got in the plane. Well, folks, they touched down here 2 hours later, and 3 people got out of that plane. Well, one of them brand new. And you feel kind of bad for that little kid because he doesn't have a hometown to put on his birth certificate. They just went with what they had: latitude, longitude, and altitude. And the sort of thing makes the news when it happens in a 747. You can imagine a little 3-seater like that. Beta and Alpha circle around ahead of us here, and you notice that pretty tight spiral they pull off. That is a practice maneuver called a slip turn. They dropped down in a hurry, but because he banked into that turn so hard, he actually reduced his forward airspeed. So now at this point he's going nice and slow, can bring it in for an easy touchdown. Can't actually see the water at this point. Just operating off years of instinct and feel. Slowly, gently, bring it in, touchdown. And yeah, you bounce a little bit, but this isn't gymnastics. Anything you can walk away from is a 10. We do have a lot of very talented pilots up here, folks. 1 in 82 Alaskans is actually licensed to fly. And I'd like you to all get a chance to meet our pilot friend over here. So I'm going to see if I can flag him down to the radio. We can hear a bit about his life story.
Discovery 3, paging 88 Alpha. How many are up there this morning?
First time. Yes, it's a shame these dogs get more excited about this. Gives them a command and away they go. And notice, folks, how much quieter it just got. And all the energy and enthusiasm turns right into dog power. And he's going to do a quick U-turn here. You'll see him again on the far side of this dog yard, coming from right to left, out from behind the cabin that he and Susan built together. You see them picking up speed as they go. Every other dog in that yard kind of freaking out. Hey, wait, don't pick me, I want to go. But you don't have to worry, because every dog gets to exercise every single day here at Trailbreaker Kennel. It's part of what makes them so long-lived and such amazing athletes. You know, Granite lived to be 17 and a half years old before he passed, even after his near-fatal heart infection. And he ran over 40,000 miles in his lifetime. These dogs are capable of great things as long as you take good care of them. Now, keep your eyes peeled to the far end of this lake here, the base of those
Here
tall
we are
trees.
coming out of the trees on the far side of the water, and these guys are flying. It's a beautiful team here today. Each dog is doing their fair share of the work, and that's because the older dogs are teaching them the value of teamwork. When we go on 1,000-mile marathons like the Iditarod or the Yukon Quest, to successfully complete that, we have to go over 100 miles every day, and that takes teamwork. That's what I'm seeing here, because they can look up and down the gang line, and where it attaches to their harnesses, those are nice and tight, so it means everybody's doing their job. I have to give them a command, but I'll call you on the way back. Huh.
All right, now you hear that ha command, that's for left. G is for right. And those commands actually come from driving mules on a farm, but you notice he doesn't have any bits in their teeth. Right? There's no reins at their back. He doesn't have any physical means of controlling that team. It's all that trust and be trusted relationship, so the dogs will listen to your verbal commands. Other commands include hike or all right to get them started. They don't actually say mush, that was from an old radio show. And then whoa to stop, but they don't like that one too much. Kind of say whoa and hold on and pray. It looks like Dave has finished his turnaround here. It almost looks like the dogs have picked up speed on the way back.
Here we are headed home, and this is my favorite part of the run because I don't have to tell them anything. The dogs instinctively know we're headed towards the finish line, and they're using their reserve energy to really surge forward and we pass anybody that might be in front of us. It's a great team, I'll tell you more when I get back.
Now, folks, again, we mentioned that trust and be trusted relationship. It's right there in the name that it has to go both ways. It's not just the dogs listening to you, it's you listening to them. Dave is only running 7 dogs this morning, but an Iditarod team starts with 14. You can imagine how much further out those leads are, and they're the ones who have the sense of smell and hearing and the instincts. They're the ones who's going to know when there's trouble on the trail far before we can ever see it and react and try to pass commands along. The successful mushers aren't the ones who are constantly maintaining the trail themselves. It's the ones who trust their leads to make the moment-to-moment decisions. That's part of what Granite was so renowned for, was his ability to safely lead teams through very difficult trails. And it's part of why Susan and Dave worked so hard to preserve his legacy and story. During the last year of Susan's life, they actually got it written down and published into this beautiful children's book that I'd like to tell you folks about in a minute. But Dave's coming in for the tail end of his run here. Let's kind of hope those brakes hold this morning. All right. On with a fantastic run this morning from Dave Monson.
And then just like us, everybody loves to play.
Yeah, and I guess these guys just kind of want to hop out of gym class and cool off in the showers here. Well, Dave, I do want to take a few minutes to talk with everyone on board about this book that you and Susan wrote together. And what I'm hoping for is, when we see you down at the Chena Village later on, if somebody has a copy of that and would like for you to sign it or maybe make an inscription, would you be able to do that for them?
Well, absolutely. You know, one of the things that's meant the most to me and to my family over these last many years now is when we've been able to share Susan's story and the story of Granite with other families. What really touches me is how much children will always identify with him. Of course, I think that's because Granite was a little dog that nobody believed in, but because Susan had faith in him. And I remember watching those guys work so hard together until eventually he became the greatest lead dog in history. So if any of you would like me to personalize a copy, either yourselves, children, grandchildren, or perhaps even library, it would be my privilege to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. And we're just happy that we don't have to say goodbye for good. We just have to say we'll see you downstream at the Chena Village.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by. And we'll see you downstream.
Dog food cut. I started by removing the head and separating the 2 fillets from the backbone, leaving them connected at the tail so I can then hang them up on the drying rack. There's still meat left on this backbone, and since nothing is ever wasted in our culture, we would feed this to the dogs at camp. If this this were a head of a higher quality king or sockeye salmon, it would be made into fish head soup for our elders.
Okay, Annette, fish head soup. What does that taste like?
I don't know, Skylar. I'm not old enough.
Right. I'll check back with you here in about 40 years, I guess. Now, Annette, what is it that you're doing right now with those fillets?
Right now, I'm scoring the salmon, which is making diagonal cuts through the flesh down to the skin. Scoring creates more surface area on the fillet, allowing the smoke to work deeper into the salmon and further dehydrate it.
Okay, I can see how that opens up almost kind of like a vent to let the smoke get in there. That's beautiful. And now, Annette, you mentioned though that you don't put it straight into the smokehouse from here. Why is that?
Well, we don't like to put a wet drippy salmon directly into the smokehouse because it could mold. So it will hang up here until it stops dripping, and has a nice sheen or glaze on it. Then into the smokehouse it would go. Keep in mind that every family and region have their own preferences and techniques for smoking salmon. This process is for the dogs. So once the salmon is inside the smokehouse, it would be rotated around for up to 2 to 3 weeks until it's fully dehydrated, weighs less than a pound, and looks something like this.
All right, I'm really impressed you get that whole thing down under a pound, Annette, but I'm looking at that. It looks tough to bite into. I'm sure the dogs love it, but how would you prepare it if it was for you or me to eat?
There are several differences. For ourselves, we like to add a little more time and care into the process. First, we start off with the higher quality king or silver salmon, and then we would wash it very well. We also like fillets, but we cut ours into long vertical pieces called salmon strips. Next, we would soak it in a brine. My family likes to use brown sugar and salt. Then the salmon would go up onto the racks and be put into the smokehouse, but for a shorter amount of time than for the dogs, maybe just a few days so it could have a softer texture. Finally, we like to use a different wood to smoke our salmon. We like to use alder or cottonwood because they give the salmon a sweeter taste. For the dogs, we like to use spruce, driftwood, whatever we find really. They're not very picky.
I'm sure they're happy with every bit they get. Well, thank you so much, Annette. And as we pull up towards the mooring area here, can you tell us what we'll be seeing out at the rest of the Chena Village?
Your guides and I are glad to share the village with you and introduce you to our culture. This village is a replica of the original Chena Village Captain Jim visited while running freight. When the Chena Village became